In this video, we're going to talk about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. What exactly are we talking about when we say those terms? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression? Well, generally we're referring to a constitutional right. A right to speak, share ideas, communicate in some manner without facing punishment from the government. That's a definition from the Cornell Legal Information Institute. In that context, freedom of speech or freedom of expression can be seen as a negative right. The idea that the public has a right to do something without interference from the government. Now, the laws vary around the world. There's about 150 constitutions that guarantee some kind of freedom of speech or freedom of expression, but it is a spectrum. Some of those rights are very permissive, and some of them are a little more restrictive that allow the government to place restrictions on speech. What type of restrictions? Well, there are lots of different manifestations of this. Gag laws that prevent you from speaking about settlement at a trial, for example. Hate speech laws that criminalize hate directed at specific groups. Blasphemy laws. There are national security restrictions that prevent people from revealing information that might be classified or threats to national security. Other laws that exist to try and ensure public safety, and many other different exceptions around the world. I'm going to look at a few examples just to see how these might work in practice. In Canada, freedom of expression is guaranteed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms under Section 2, the Fundamental Freedom section, where everybody has freedom of thought, belief, opinion, expression, including freedom of the press and other media communications. So it's written rather broadly, and in Canada the courts have a tendency to interpret charter rights broadly. However, there is a clause for limiting those rights, and that's in Section 1, the Reasonable Limits Clause. So there is a balance that the courts try to strike. They do try to permit an expansive reading of some of these charter rights, but they all must align with the limitations clause in Section 1. By comparison, the United States First Amendment of their Constitution says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the speech or freedom of the press. And that is a very absolutist way to think about this, that the expression is guaranteed, Congress shall make no law. So where do the restrictions come from? Because there are restrictions on things like libel and slander and espionage acts that prohibit the dissemination of classified information. Well, those have arisen through court decisions, through the process of judicial review. They have established where the outer bounds are on the freedom of speech that's guaranteed by the First Amendment. In a country like Germany, they do have constitutional protection in what they call their basic law. Article 5, every person shall have right to freely express and disseminate opinions in speech, writing, and pictures. However, they also have a sort of supremacy clause, Article 1, that says human dignity is what counts the most. So any laws and any expressions also have to align with that guarantee of human dignity. And there's also provisions in their general law, their sort of criminal law, that prevent certain types of speech, such as hate speech, denial of the Holocaust, and certain restrictions like that. So it's a little more nuanced in terms of the speech is guaranteed, but it also has to meet these certain requirements. India is another example where there's speech guarantees, but also statutory limits. Section 19 of the Constitution provides all citizens having the right to freedom of speech and expression, but in the sections that immediately follow the subsections say that there's nothing in this that prevents the state from passing laws to restrict speech on grounds of protecting public safety or national security or defamation or anything like that. So it's guaranteed in the Constitution, but the Constitution immediately says the government can override these freedoms of speech in specific situations. Now, finally, at one of the more restrictive extremes is the People's Republic of China. Article 35 of their constitution guarantees freedom of speech and association, but those are strictly controlled. The Chinese Communist Party, at least since 1989 or so, has operated on a policy of what they call public opinion guidance, is that the state should control communication. They also operate with what's known as the Great Firewall, that restricts and censors certain topics that are available digitally, electronically, from outside the country through the internet. So here you've got a situation where there's constitutional protections on paper, but those don't really exist in practice. It's a more restrictive approach to free speech and free expression. So just to recap, many countries, about 80% of the countries in the world, have some kind of freedom of expression or free speech protected in their constitution. Now, within that, the states do have some latitude to restrict speech. And there are many different types of laws, such as defamation law, hate speech law, that can criminalize some types of speech. And those will vary depending on the country, depending on the jurisdiction. Some of those are very permissive that allow almost anything, like the United States. Some of them might be more restrictive, like India or China.